So continuing from last week we talked about the demoniac and Jesus healing him as well as cleansing the whole land and sending back this healed man who had his demons cast out to spread the gospel of the kingdom all the way back in his hometown, Decapolis. And today we'll be continuing on starting in verse 21. And now this will be a somewhat of two events, but they're both linked, and this is why Mark includes them both in the same event. Just starting in verse 21, it says, "And when Jesus passed over again by ship unto the other side," that is where he came from to go over to the Gadarenes, it says, "much people gathered unto him, and he was nigh unto the sea." So everybody's coming to meet him. Word has spread there. He's growing in popularity. People are hearing all these things about Jesus. Especially since this man who has cast out demons from him, he went over and spread the news in Decapolis, a huge area of 10 cities. But it says there were so many people gathered unto him, and he was nigh unto the sea. And behold, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet. Now this is special because the synagogue and Jesus didn't have the greatest relation. As a matter of fact, most of the leaders of the synagogue, though not all, had huge problems with Jesus. He would challenge many things about them. He would challenge many of the concepts that they sometimes knowingly and sometimes unknowingly had wrong. A lot of the legalists truly believed what they taught and saw Jesus as a heretic. And then there were those who were simply there for ill-gotten gain, and to them Jesus was a danger to their profiting. A lot of the people in the synagogues at that time were not sincere men of God. A lot of them were actually appointees. A lot of them were bought positions, especially those who carry their righteousness as a badge of honor, as something granting them superiority over others. But even with the sincere, they had their problems in that they opposed Jesus. But Jairus didn't. He had no problem with Jesus. As a matter of fact, when he saw him, he pushed through the whole crowd to get to the front and fell down before him. Now this is actually two things. One, he's worshiping him. This is not simply a trip and a fall. He is bowing down before Jesus. But he uses a different word for it than usual because it's made out of desperation. You see, why is Jairus so desperately falling down before Jesus? When you bow down, you're showing Jesus' superiority over you, that you recognize his sovereignty. But the word that's used here, and why it says he fell at his feet, shows an immediacy, that it's out of desperation. Why? It says, "And besought him greatly, saying, My little daughter lieth at the point of death. I pray thee, come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live." His daughter is dying. Now, this is something that we see later in the passage verified, but I want to make it clear that it was actually already true by verse 23. Is Jairus' daughter isn't at the point of death, she has actually died. And Jairus himself reveals this when he says, "Lay thy hands on her that she may be healed, and she shall live." Now why does he say she's at the point of death? He's a good and loving father, and Jairus isn't speaking by inspiration, he's speaking from his heart. He doesn't exactly come to terms with the fact that she has died yet. He says it towards the end, but at the beginning he's wording it as though she's just deeply ill but could snap back at any time. This is his desperation. And I know what it's like to be in those phases of desperation. It's every thought going through your head and you can't think anything clearly. So you turn to what you know best that can solve it. I remember one time I was driving to church and my car died. My car died right on the road and I was in the middle of the road. And though it ended up being something silly that I had accidentally turned the key while driving, the first thing I did was I picked up my phone and I called my dad and told him what was happening. Because I knew he knew cars and he could solve it. My mind wasn't thinking anything. And so I called him, and while I called him, I realized that my key was unturned. But in that moment of desperation, I simply called out to who I knew could help me. And Jairus, a man from the synagogue, called out to his enemy in a way. Now obviously Jesus wasn't Jairus' enemy, but by his profession they were at odds. Those of the synagogue opposed Jesus. Caiaphas was the high priest, and Caiaphas was the one who sent Jesus to his death. But Jairus is struggling. But because he immediately bowed down and begged Jesus to help him, it says, and Jesus went with him, and much people followed him and thronged him. Of course, people were following him all around so much that it was crowding him, thronging him. Everyone wanted to see what he was doing. As a matter of fact, even just his arrival at the port brought a crowd with him. So they're all following him. But then on his way to Jairus' house, it says, a certain woman which had an issue of blood 12 years. This woman came to him. But now I want to address this really briefly. It doesn't say what type of issue of blood this is. There is some belief that it is part of the menstrual period. But of course, 12 years being abnormal. Or it could be fibroids or another type of hemorrhage. But the important issue here is actually simply that there's an issue of blood. Because Scripture refers to the fact that an issue of blood in Leviticus 15 makes them ritually unclean. Now, being ritually unclean, you can't be around other people. You can't be at the temple or at the tabernacle. You can't be with who God made you to be with. You can't be with each other. You can't be in the community. You can't be at what was then the church. And she had to undergo it for 12 years. Now it says, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse. Now, I want to say something, and to me, this is very important when we're reading through what happened to her, to understand that she wasn't a perfect woman. I know a lot of times when we read through the miracles that happened, we hear that this person's great faith is what brought them to call out for the miracle, or that this person's greatest devotion is what brought it about. We were recently reading through the centurion who it said had the greater faith than all of Israel. Now this woman wasn't wicked, but she wasn't acting in faith from the start. It says that where she went to many physicians. She went to one physician and the physician couldn't heal her. And instead of seeing that it was that couldn't be solved by worldly matters, it says she went to more and more. And that each time it got worse. Each time she turned to the worldly powers, it got worse. And she still went to them. But it does say, when she heard of Jesus, came in the press and touched his garment. She heard of Jesus, probably in the same way that everyone else in the crowd had. This man is incredible. He has great wisdom, and even better than that, he can heal all these infirmities. There was a man brought in through the very ceiling who was brought in because he couldn't move, and he walked out carrying his bed. That's a wonderful sign. And there was this man with thousands of demons in him who is now preaching the glory of God in his hometown. This would be a wonderful man to go to if no one could heal you. But it says she came in the press behind, that is the crowd of people, and touched his garment. Now, it doesn't say why she touched his garment. There's two possible reasons, and maybe both are true. One is because she was ritually unclean. She didn't want to touch Jesus himself, or she couldn't. Now, the more likely reason is it was just that many people. So crowded up. I think about when I see modern day celebrities, about how it's almost impossible to even get near them because of how many people surround them. But it says that she touched his garment. Just his garment. For she said, "If I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole." She believed in the power that not only Jesus had the ability to heal her, but that his very garment could. And it says here, "And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague." She could tell, which shows that this wasn't just blood. I've had cuts that bled and I didn't feel anything beyond that. This was some deep plague about her that was causing it. But it was all dried up, and she healed, and she was all... And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press and said, "Who touched my clothes?" Now, when it says that virtue had gone out of him, this opens up into a much broader topic, but what it was is that she was healed through this blessed glory about Jesus. It's called virtue in him. That he had not only in him, but in just his very garments. Which is actually why, though errantly, many modern churches will build entire buildings around garments that they believed were held by Jesus or by the apostles. But he could sense that virtue had gone out of him. It had gone from him to her. And his disciples said unto him, that seest the multitude thronging thee, and sayest thou, "Who touched me?" They're essentially calling his question ridiculous. They're saying, how would it be possible to see all of these people and figure out who it was? Now, what's really important to notice that is no one saw it. No one saw that she was the one who touched his garment. And the way she did it, though she did know to seek out him, it was something that she was probably scared about having done. Because Jairus went and asked, she probably felt, especially given her condition and being unclean, that she couldn't ask, and therefore she would try to find a way that words it right, but to grab a little bit of his healing power. And it's not just me who's saying that she was afraid. It says, "And he looked round about to see her that had done this thing, but the woman fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth." Now at that point, she could get to Jesus. Jesus isn't now walking with Jairus. He's stopping, trying to see who did it. Now Jesus obviously knew who it was. But the disciples didn't know. No one around knew. She could have easily have taken that healing and just walked away. Gone and lived her life taking the physical benefits from Jesus. But instead she felt fear and trembling and felt that she had to confess what was done to Jesus. And she told him all the truth. Now, before I read Jesus' response, I want to mention something. We see that she did the right thing in turning to Jesus. But, and I will say this is true for most Christians, the first thing that brought her to Jesus wasn't Jesus' spiritual truth. We don't see something that indicates she came to him for his wisdom. It does seem that she was desperate for healing and she knew Jesus could heal. So, not for a wrong reason, but not exactly the reason that Jesus had hoped. Not that type of transformation that we really need. Physical healing versus spiritual healing. But notice that when she gets healed, it says virtue had gone out of him. That's not just going to heal her body. That will heal her soul. And what she probably just planned was to touch his garment and then leave in peace. Now she feels that conviction. And she confesses it to Jesus. And Jesus responds amazingly. He said unto her, Daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace and be whole of thy plague. Now that's amazing. He says, Thy faith hath made thee whole. This isn't just talking about a wholeness of the body. I've seen many people who their legs don't work and yet they are more whole than most of the world because they have something in their spirit that is far beyond. Well, what did she have? What did she have even when she was just looking for a miracle? She had faith. You won't just go to anyone who says they can do miracles. I see people all over on TV saying that they can work miracles, that their product can work miracles, their water can work miracles. And I don't buy them because I don't have faith in them. I don't believe them. But she believed that Jesus could heal her. Now she didn't know that he was so much more than that. How could she? Very little about Jesus was known. They had heard all these wonderful things about him, but at that point, his ministry was very local. Not everyone heard his words, not everyone heard his parables, and not everyone understood them. But here she has this faith and can go in peace and be whole of thy plague. But then it continues. Remember, he was going to go to Jairus' house. It says, While he yet spake, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's house certain which said, Thy daughter is dead. Why troublest thou the master any further? Now these people see it, one, going to Jesus and asking him as troubling him. And the second thing is, they say, Thy daughter is dead. Why are you talking to the master about this anymore? They're assuming that it's hopeless. His daughter is dead. No one can do anything at that point. Why do you bring this man here? Why do you bother him if she's already dead? They didn't know what he can do. As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, the word is, Why troublest thou the master any more further? It says, as soon as he heard the word that was spoken, he saith unto the ruler of the synagogue, Be not afraid, only believe. The very same thing that brought the woman that healing. The woman who was bleeding for 12 years. To believe. And it says in verse 37, "And he suffered no man to follow him, save Peter, James, and John the brother of James. And he cometh to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and seeth the tumult, and them that wept and wailed greatly." Now just notice, he doesn't invite everyone. He only invites Peter, James, and John. Probably the three most pivotal disciples. James and John were called the sons of thunder. They were bold. And Peter was called the rock because of how sturdy he was. That's what Petros means. So he picked these three. And these three become very important to the gospel later in their lives. But it says, "And he cometh to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and seeth the tumult, and them that wept and wailed greatly." The daughter has died. "And when he is come in, he saith unto them, Why make ye this ado and weep? The damsel is not dead, but sleepeth." Now I'm going to come back to this because this is probably the most important thing in this entire series of events, is that statement there. But I'll come back to it. It says, "And they laughed at him to scorn. But when he had put them all out, he taketh the father and the mother of the damsel and them that were with him, and entereth in where the damsel was lying." Now, they're mocking him. They're laughing at him. "What do you mean she's just sleeping? We know the difference between sleeping and dead." They're thinking he's crazy. He's insane. Or perhaps he's just joking. He's a very funny miracle worker. But they're doubting. They don't believe that what he's saying is true. But it says, "And he took the damsel by the hand." This is after he's separated from everyone else. Just her family. The family and the three disciples. "He took the damsel by the hand and said unto her, Talitha cumi," which is being interpreted, "Damsel, I say unto thee, arise." Now I just want to mention this, as Talitha means two things. Little girl or damsel, and little sheep. It's Aramaic. And so he's both calling her what she is, a little girl. She's 12 years old. And a little sheep. And he is the good shepherd. He says unto her, Talitha cumi, which is being interpreted, Damsel, I say unto thee, arise. And straightway the damsel arose and walked. For she was of the age of 12 years. And they were astonished with a great astonishment. And he charged them straitly that no man should know it, and commanded that something should be given her to eat. Now the reason why he gave her something to eat is the spirit can't eat. He's showing that this is not simply him bringing a ghost down from heaven, but she has truly been brought to life. He charged them straitly that no man should know it. He does this almost every time, with the exception of the demoniac, who he allowed him to tell the people of his hometown in Decapolis. But again, because of what happens when so many people hear about him, that the woman who wanted to be healed couldn't even get close enough to touch him, only his garment. He straightly charged that no man should know it. And this is one of the reasons he said, the damsel is not dead, but sleepeth. Now Jesus isn't lying. When Jesus uses the words sleepeth or sleeping, that's the way he words our deaths. Because it's not the end. We just, in a way, go to sleep and are woken up by our Lord. But when he says that she is not dead but sleepeth, those around who aren't part of the family, who don't need to know, as far as they're concerned, no miracle happened. And that's strange as this sounds, that was good for Jesus' ministry. They didn't need to know that she was brought back to life. As difficult as it is for us to imagine now, they may have sincerely believed that she was just in a deep sleep, and that Jesus simply came to wake her up. That way, one, she can live a normal life. She's not now the dead girl brought back to life, the way we think of Lazarus sometimes. But she can live a normal life. That way his ministry can still be worked to teach us our lessons through the gospel and to heal that family, but not to inhibit the ministry at that time. Would only limit it. Because too many people would think of him in terms of his healing and not in terms of his message. But to those of us who know what he did, we know also why he said, "She sleepeth." This is similar to the parables, in that they mean one thing to those with worldly minds and another thing to those who know God's truth. Now, why does Mark record all of this, and especially all of this together? Well, they happen together, but a lot of times to ensure that we got clarity of Jesus' teachings, he would pull different ones from different events. It was Luke who did it in order of chronology. But it's because each and every one of these showed desperation. A lot of times people come to church because it's Christmas time. A lot of people come to church because it's Easter. Or perhaps someone invited them. But that will say nothing has brought people closer to Jesus than times of desperation. As much as I love the joy of the holidays, remembering Jesus' birth and remembering his death on the cross, none of those bring our hearts more open to Jesus than when we personally need that message. You can't set a date in the year and say that's when the people will be open to Jesus. That will happen upon your own time. And this woman suffered for 12 years before she finally found what she needed. And with this girl, she had only lived for 12 years. And she was given, in a way, the same gift that the woman was. She was given a new life. The amount of pain that this woman who had the plague, the scripture calls it, was not living. It was suffering. So much that she went back and back over and over again just trying to be healed, but the world wasn't doing it. And the other rulers of the synagogue couldn't heal Jairus' daughter. They said, "She's dead. Don't trouble this man. We can't fix it. No one can fix it. She's gone." But Jairus knew what to do. Jairus, through his faith, was able to bring that healing to his daughter. And I'm sure, I believe this with all certainty of my heart, she appreciated that. She knew from that moment on that every breath she had was given to her by God. They were both given new life in spite of the desperation, in spite of the pain, in spite of the suffering. And Jesus says that we can have the same type of blessing. I pray that none of us have to be raised from the dead. As a matter of fact, if I do end up passing untimely, I would greatly prefer if I wasn't raised from the dead, given where we go now through Christ's cross. But even in those most dire circumstances, even through sufferings that we cannot overcome through our every effort for over a decade, we do not need to be afraid. Be not afraid, only believe. And I think he best summarizes it with this: daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. So, no matter what we're going through, even in times of greatest desperation, there could be times that we could be weeping and wailing, believing all is lost and all is given up. We could turn to the world. We could ask the world to solve our problems. And if they're medical, we could say, well, if the doctor can't solve it, well, another doctor, or another doctor, or another doctor. And even if things get worse, sometimes we will turn to just another doctor, and another doctor, and another doctor. And God certainly can work through doctors. God certainly sometimes does give us news that we don't want to hear. But that's not always God's answer. That's not always God's ways. So if we are not afraid and we only believe that God will do what God has it planned to do, no matter our lives before, no matter how hopeless it seems, no matter what everyone in the world is saying, He will break that barrier. He will set us free. He will give us that hope and that new life, and He will make us whole. That woman not only was taken away from her pain, she was cut off from the rest of the world and was now able to return to all society, return to the synagogues, return to worship of her Lord. And Jairus, the one who was surrounded by those who hated Jesus, who despised the man, was now blessed greater than almost any of those healed before then. Those who could not walk could walk, but nothing is better than being given back your child. A child who you thought all is lost. That everyone was telling you all is lost. To where they were already mourning her death. But Jesus changed that. So I ask that whatever you're going through life, if you're not going through it today, when it comes, turn to Him. Use that desperation not as a feeling of hopelessness, but let that desperation pull you closer to Jesus. Because it's in those times that we are closest to Jesus. We could use those times and be mad at Him. We could use those times and be angry at God. Or we could use those times to trust in Him. And He may bless us better than we could have ever imagined. When we thought things were hopeless, He showed us a new light. Be not afraid, only believe. But at this time, the altar is open. And I invite you all that if you have something that you would like prayer for, be it an ailment, be it a struggle, be it something that you would like God's help with, He can do miracles. And though I hope we're not dealing with anything like Jairus is, and I pray that none of us ever have to, even the things that we would call little inconveniences matter to God. God cares about us. God loves us. And God watches over us. So whatever you need, we invite you to come as we sing. If you would like to rededicate your life, if you'd like to receive salvation, or if you would like to receive baptism, if there's anything you would like prayer for, any need whatsoever, we invite you to come as we sing.